Good evening, everybody. It's so nice to see all of you here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Anna Song, and I am the chair of the music department at Linfield University. So welcome to the first event of our virtual residency with Fear No Music. This is all sponsored by the— Good evening, everybody. It's so nice to see all of you here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Anna Song, and I am the chair of the music department at Linfield University. So sorry about that. So this whole residency is sponsored by the Lucrute Art Series. And I'd like to thank Ronnie Lucrute for her support in making this possible. We are so grateful for all that she does to allow so many of us the opportunity to explore art and its impact on society and our world. I want to also thank Travis McGuire for his help in kind of behind the scenes tech stuff so that we can have this virtual residency possible. I also want to thank, of course, Monica Ohuchi, the executive director of Fear No Music, as well as Kenji Bunch, artistic director of Fear No Music, and our two guests, in addition to Kenji, Brian Mohr and James Shields. What a performance that was. I was really just so, I just felt so moved by all the various the energy of the last piece and just the amazing playing that we heard and saw. And you know, all of that goes into making this production, something like this, possible. Is just, you know, I really hope that we can kind of hear from each of you about what this project has entailed and involved from each of you. So I wonder if we can just start and hear from each of you to tell us a little bit about yourselves, your musical background, and in a way, how did your paths kind of bring you to this moment to work on this project together? So maybe we can start with Kenji.
Sure. Thanks, Anna. So I'm Kenji Bunch. I'm a composer and violist. I've been the artistic director of Fear No Music since 2014. Monica and I moved back to Portland I lived in, okay, I'm from Portland, born and raised here. I went to New York to go to music school for college and stuck around New York for 22 years. Came back in 2013. Monica's my wife, as well as being executive director. And in 2014, we assumed the leadership of the organization. Fear No Music's been around for close to 30 years. And we were honored to step into that legacy. And one of the neat things about being a small organization is we can pivot quickly as things change, and things certainly changed. Not only with the safety and the issues with public gatherings, but also with all the upheaval of the last year. I had another plan already set for this season, and I moved things around, and I thought, you know what, we need to do an entire season devoted to the music of Black American composers. And I'm just so thrilled that it came together the way it did, and just hearing the music tonight, I'm just so grateful for James, his wonderful playing, and for Brian. So maybe I'll throw this to Brian, who I met at my son's preschool, because Brian's son was at the same preschool, and we just got to talk and realized that we had some things in common, and then it just lined up so that we could work together this season. So Brian, how about why don't you tell us about yourself?
All right. I'm Brian Mohr, sound engineer and sound designer. Normally work almost exclusively in live sound, live concerts, and of course, you mentioned the pivot. So suddenly I've been doing a lot more recording projects like that. My background, I guess it's been 20 years I've been doing sound engineering now. I've guess my big claim to fame is I'm one of two of the live touring engineers for the Kronos Quartet. And so I've been around quite a many places with them. I've also assisted with some operas of John Adams. A lot of his orchestral and opera works involve sound design or amplification of singers. And it's obviously a nuanced endeavor. So if you can get yourself into that world, many organizations are very afraid of rock and roll engineers mixing opera. So that sort of new music world is kind of where I've been for many years. So yeah, Kenji mentioned about, things we have in common, and certainly it has fit well as a sort of a continuation of the things I was already involved with. So that's me, I guess.
Great, thank you. And last but certainly not least, James, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm having to stop myself from asking Brian a million questions about both the Kronos Quartet and John Adams, who I'm a big fan of. I'll wait until afterward too. I didn't know about all that. That's really, really cool. So I'm James Shields. I'm a clarinetist. Currently, my day job in theory is with the Oregon Symphony. That's why I came out here to Portland. I've known Monica for a while because she was my piano fundamentals teacher when I was a freshman at Juilliard. Being a very bad piano student, she was a great teacher. And I've known about Kenji's music for a long time, in particular because, as I've joked with him before, in my first job with the New Mexico Symphony in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, I ran into tons of people, small concert presenters who loved Kenji's music. So I got to hear a lot of his music when I was sort of freshly into the professional world. But I didn't meet him. I don't think we met until I was here.
Yeah.
Did we, Kenji? Okay. Yeah. So I was familiar with Kenji's music, and after Albuquerque, I did a stint in Toronto with the Canadian Opera Company. And I was very bummed to have joined the company like 1 month after they finished doing a production of John Adams' Nixon in China, actually. Like I said, a huge fan of his work. But I did 5 years with the opera company there before coming to Portland. And I've been thrilled to be here. Super stoked to be part of Fear No Music and all the important work that they are doing.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Well, James, I'm going to have you kind of, the first question for you, just, you've told us a little bit about each of the pieces, in the video, but could you also share with us kind of maybe how you specifically chose these pieces for the program, or what was that your choice, or was it Kenji's choice as the artistic director? Kind of a little background of that.
Kenji and I spoke a little bit about the program, but it was primarily pieces that he found, which I was very thankful for, because all three of these pieces I think are definitely going to be part of kind of my standard solo repertoire moving forward. And I wasn't familiar with any of the three of them. So I don't know if Kenji has any more commentary, but I think one thing I will say about repertoire these days, exploring repertoire in the age of the internet, I think there's really no excuse for not sort of constantly be searching for new rep and expanding your repertoire. For better and worse, the internet is an incredibly powerful tool, obviously. And every time I search to find something something new, either just generally for my instrument or specifically to address a shortcoming, for instance, just not trying to increase representation in my repertoire, it takes hardly 10, 15 minutes before I found something that I really want to play. And I think that I think it's fair to say that laziness or ignorance is no longer a reasonable excuse, especially now for broadening the repertoire. So that being said, these pieces were brand new to me, and I'm really thrilled that Kenji brought them to my attention.
Yeah, I should admit that the Mitchell piece was sort of serendipitous. I had originally wanted to program another work of hers that was kind of a graphic score and wasn't instrument specific. But when I was able to get in touch with her, it turned out that she didn't have the score. She wasn't going to be in her office where the music was, and she had no way of getting it to us in time. And she suggested, she said, well, actually, I just wrote this bass clarinet piece that would be really fun. And man, I'm glad that happened, because it ended up being such a fun way to end the program.
Yeah, definitely. So that last piece then had been commissioned or something? It was, this is probably maybe the second performance, or?
I think it is the second performance of the piece. And she was very generous about offering it to us to play with her blessing. And it was fully notated, right, James? Basically all there's some...
with the exception of a couple spots, there were a few spots that were sort of improvisatory general directions of what kind of things she wanted to happen, and some graphic notation, but mostly written out on a score. I could get maybe some idea of what some of her graphic notation scores might have looked up, but it was predominantly written out standard notation.
Great. So I want to just turn to Brian for a second. So Brian, you're the recording engineer for these projects, but maybe you could describe in greater detail, like what specifically your role is or has been, and kind of what challenges you faced, or kind of what part did you play in this whole project?
Sure. I'm trying to think where to begin. Monica allowed me to sort of take on sort of the production leadership role. So, and which is, I would say, not too uncommon for these kind of music-based projects that typically when you're doing film and, a television or movie shoot, the film and, the acting drives everything, and sound is sort of this follow-on afterthought. And I've done a couple of these kind of recording broadcast productions, and what's exciting for me, of course, is that in fact, the sound and the music is the priority. So in this case, because, we're a little bit smaller, I was sort of a shared role of being sort of the production head, as well as being in charge of sound. So as far as challenges, I don't know, it's been fun to be in different spaces that are, and not necessarily concert hall environments. And then, so for me, typically I would say like more of a sound designer is sort of like the artistic side of what you're doing, whereas sound engineering is sort of the engineering and technical side. And so, for example, when James had his the regular clarinet, which just that I'll throw in that beautiful instrument, I just love looking at it, but is like, how much reverb should I put on it? Because we're in this very small room, but we all love to hear kind of a nice reverb, but then I don't want it to sound cheesy and distracting from the playing, and so if I had to say there was a challenge for these, it was sort of deciding what's that balance of what's realistic versus what's pleasant to listen to when we're, in a garage, as you mentioned, and, and should we be true to the garage sound? but then do we want to sound like we're on a Zoom meeting? So like that's, kind of a trade-off thing. So I would say maybe that was the biggest challenge.
So it's
Brian,
sort of the reverse of what you usually have to do. If you're recording in a concert hall, you're trying to capture the sound, the authentic sound of that space. But if you're recording in James's garage, you're trying to make it sound like some kind of concert space.
Well, it's funny because Brian, I was going to say that as I, a lot of musicians are now becoming like various degrees of amateur recording engineers, videographers these days, trying to, just like do whatever we can to feel some semblance of still being a performer in these times. And I have to admit that I've been feeling myself undergo a very clear progression towards preferring less reverb, which for me is very weird because like I've always been like a player that's just like, whatever, let's like go to the warmest cathedral possible and just like screw clarity, like whatever, throw it out the window, let's just get that warm sound. But I find like now that I am personally identifying with things beyond just like the tone that, of my clarinet or whatever, and I have a little bit more stake in like, how clear does this sound, if I'm layering like 17 clarinets on top of each other. I'm finding myself valuing totally different things these days now that I've got my fractional recording engineer's cap on.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up an interesting point, and I'm actually on like a Facebook forum of, exactly like New York musicians in conjunction with engineers. And it was exactly like, because this one engineer was like so tired of fielding questions because everyone suddenly wanted to have a little home setup, exactly as you mentioned. But I think it's an incredibly valuable lesson. And for, any musicians out there, I definitely recommend experimenting on your own, because part of what you learn is the language to be able to speak to engineers. So when you mention tone and warmth, right, engineers are looking at a bunch of numbers on a scale, right? And so when we talk about low frequency or, a C2, bass note, but what hertz is that, right? Because right, so it's a different language. And you talk about clarity, is that less reverb, is it more high frequency, is it things like that. So yeah, I mean, I'm always impressed when someone's saying like, oh, let's have 2 dB less of reverb opposed to 10% less, because we don't work in percentages, we work in decibels. So anyway, it's a good exercise for anyone really to dabble in engineering.
And Anna, I don't know if we've been explicit about this fact, but after a lot of discussion about how we're going to put on these concerts, we ended up deciding, and mostly from Brian's experience, we decided not to be live, but to record these in advance, just because there are so many things that can go wrong in a true live stream. And so this was captured earlier and then put together. And I don't know, maybe Brian, you can maybe tell us about your experiences that led you to that philosophy.
Well, fortunately, I wouldn't say it was because of a big crash and burn. But I would say that one of the things that I think about a lot is what does the audience gain from it? So, if you and Monica say, oh, we want to do these home concerts and we're going to do these live streams, what I would ask you is, what is the benefit of it actually being live versus being recorded in advance? Because, and certainly, if we can, hear the feedback and have some kind of interaction or an audience, like I mentioned that, I used to exclusively work in live. So of course I love that, but we can present a much cleaner, more fluid performance, by recording it in advance, and presenting kind of the pieces next to each other. rather than having, scene changes and changing instrument and, someone tripped on a cable and this got unplugged, that there's a lot of pitfalls. And so I think it just, it's allows for a more secure and experience for the audience if there's not some kind of feedback that you're getting from the audience by playing live. So
yes, for sure. I mean, I think all of us have kind of been, exposed to so much of watching either live streams and pre-recorded things, just because we don't have any other choice right at this moment to enjoy music, and especially new music. So I wanted to just maybe turn to a few of the questions. We've been getting some questions from our students and community members and faculty. So the technology has, as frustrated as we might be or tired of Zoom and all that stuff just because of the pandemic, but it has really enabled us really unprecedented opportunities. So in this case, some of the composers, of course, aren't local, aren't from Portland. One of us was curious, to what extent were you able to collaborate with the composers that were featured on the program? Was there any sort of back and forth, sending recordings or rehearsing together through Zoom or anything like that?
I was able to ask a few questions, particular with Derek Carter's piece. I had an exchange back and forth with him on that front. With Nicole Mitchell, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I wish I had reached out to her more. Got the piece relatively close to the concert, and she offered to work with me over Zoom, but I was just running around at the time and didn't have time. And I wish that I had. And before the next time I play this piece, I'm probably going to reach out to her and see if that offer is still good, because, there are just a couple of areas where the notation is a little less clear, and I kind of want to know how she feels about, are you going for this? Are you going for that? If I have these two kind of sounds that I can work with, which do you prefer? And I mean, all notation is incomplete and sort of a compromise, whether you're talking about like, Gregorian chant, Baroque music, jazz music, whatever. There's varying degrees of stuff you have to fill in as a performer, but in particular, this piece had some relatively open-ended stuff that I had a few questions about in terms of, what's the aim here? What kind of sound are we trying to capture? How do you imagine like the drama of this unfolding that would have been instrumental? That being said, I didn't find the piece like confusingly unclear or anything like that, but especially for a work that's, we're talking like second performance or whatever it was, not really a record of past performances to draw on. I'm going to reach out to her at some point when I do it again.
Great. Another question that has come up from one of our students is, what are some of the things that excite you, Brian, specifically about the future of online classical music concerts? But I guess this question, could be answered by any of you, really.
So what that makes me think of is the New York Mets live broadcasts, because they were, kind of one of the early pioneers of really committing to some kind of online content. And, for those of us in the live environment, there was a really big kind of argument about, is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Or, is it encouraging people to stay in the living room and we don't have the live experience? And James actually mentioned Nixon in China. So I'll bring that up again, because in fact, I was there at Canadian Opera Company doing Nixon in China. And it happened somehow, I kind of caught on to one production. They tend to be so expensive. So sort of one company or a couple companies will build one, and then other companies will actually remount the same set and directing and all this. So I happened to be in Sun Valley, Idaho when the Met did Nixon. And I went, this is, it's a town of like 3,000, Ketchum, Idaho, in the middle of Idaho. And so I went down the local kind of opera appreciation, group locally, was hosting a viewing event. So we went. And so, I'm like sitting in this movie theater in this tiny little town watching this amazing, very high production value HD stream of the Met Opera. And I thought, this is amazing. You could grow up in the smallest little town anywhere and not have access to, flying to New York or a major city in the world, and seeing the level of musicianship that happens on these stages. So I think the conversation continues forever about, live versus online. But if we talk about what I'm excited about, I'm excited that, even for like Fear No Music, we could be reaching people anywhere in the world, across continents with what is Kenji's artistic vision, what is the music we're trying to share, and things like that. So while the in-person experience is what kind of makes me feel great, and probably for a lot of other musicians, I would say that's at least the best upside to think about is the reach that we can get to the people that otherwise wouldn't be able to experience it.
Yeah, absolutely. The access is really pretty amazing. It makes me think of work with. I've been this season coaching the viola section of the Metropolitan Youth Symphony here in Portland, and which if things were normal, I probably wouldn't be able to do. It's a Saturday afternoon. I'm usually watching the kids here at home, but I can stay home and just hop on Zoom for an hour. And what they can do is instead of meet as a group in rehearsal in Portland, they have people from all over there's a violist in the section from Peru. And they've just invited people anywhere, young students, to play in the orchestra, and they're able to do that through this platform. So there's something to be said for the access that it allows.
It's actually sort of, I wanted to say to James to backtrack to one of the other questions also about what you have to say about playing live in front of an audience versus, the opportunity to actually record it maybe a few times and cover mistakes, and how you felt about what you prefer.
I think I'm known for my non-answer, half-answer answers, which is that's like all good and bad and pros and cons all over the map. And as far as the specific question you just asked, pros and cons. I mean, honestly, I'm more comfortable in a live setting psychologically, in terms of just being like, hey, it is what it is. You got to just do your best. There's a whole performance psychology about preparation, accepting mistakes. It's a long process to getting to that point where you can both be highly invested in what you're doing, potentially personally identifying with the outcome probably more than you should, and figuring out how to balance all that without losing your mind on a day-to-day basis is a struggle. And I think I can't really get into like taking multiple takes and at one after another, because I think my psychology at this point is just geared towards like preparation and then acceptance of what happens, which is like what I think you have to do in the live setting. On the other hand, I've recorded crazy pieces before. One piece by Pierre Boulez I recorded once where I was literally like splicing in like one note at a time during some passages. So you gotta be flexible. I think so far in this in this environment, in the COVID environment we're in, I'm sort of trying to pretend that I'm still a live performer and kind of, but again, that's partly my personality. I know other performers who are predominantly live musicians who, in this environment, they love the ability to be like, I'm going to put my most absurd perfectionist standards forward now and just demand that we do however many takes. And I think for some people, they're happy to be able to operate in that kind of a way, but that's not really my style. I think as far as like the broader digital question and how much things are going to change moving forward, I think it's really interesting. I'm a big fan of Berlin Philharmonic Digital Concert Hall. I watch stuff on there all the time. I think the access is amazing, and I hope it sticks around. But there's also this question of like what who dominates that marketplace when you are not operating in like a local environment where a lot of the incentives to go out and see a concert are maybe the performers. Obviously there's like the live sound thing, which I think is a real effect. It's just exciting to be in the room where like sounds are happening. I think anybody who stops and thinks about the economics of like how bars survive realizes that like, people are obviously paying a huge markup to be out of their house doing a thing. And not that I'm like encouraging like widespread alcohol consumption here, but you just like think about how much alcohol per unit dollar is in like any bottle of vodka that you could take home, and then what it costs to go out. I mean, we can question those pricings, but people like to be out, they like to be together. And it's a little bit tricky in my mind, like financially, what the right balance is. I hope that organizations like the Oregon Symphony will provide some online content moving forward, in particular in domains where they can increase access and remove barriers. But that being said, 2 years from now, if we're back to normal, quote unquote, and able to do live concerts, I think orchestras have a lot of questions about who can access the concert hall, who feels comfortable there, who our concerts are for, that need to take place in the domain of live concerts as well. So I see it as not an either or question, more of an and question. And I think people have been saying that like live concerts of various types are dying for like decade after decade after decade after decade, and it never quite seems to happen. And eventually people find a way to take advantage of all these different mediums in the proportion that works out for them. One thing I will say is that just really quickly, there are lots of upsides to the challenges musicians are facing right now. If you try and frame them in the right way. Of course, there's like various scary aspects as far as like economic survival and just questions about when's the pandemic gonna give way to the next chapter and all that. But it's been interesting utilizing technology at home. And Kenji, I don't know how much like multi-track recording you've done, but it's a really helpful educational tool to record with yourself and do multi-track stuff, because just human psychology, it's not an attractive quality, but I think a lot of us know that feeling of it's so easy to blame other people for things, and it's just like a default tendency. And if you're like recording a bunch of tracks with yourself, there's really no one else to blame. Like, I mean, like, I have a hard time separating myself with the version of me that played out of time 3 minutes ago on like the first track that I laid down. And so I would say for educators, it's a really useful tool to like have your students use a cappella or apps like that to like record on top of themselves, because like I said, there's nobody to blame, and it really like can reveal some, let's say, areas of improvement that could happen. So that's been really fun. I think my playing has improved in ways that are directly related to that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And with the absence of chamber music, just being able to line up rhythmically with another part and concentrate on what you're playing while also listening to something else happening, just that coordination of doing two things at once, that you can get those skills deteriorate if you don't do them. If you're a basketball player and you go a year without playing basketball, you're not going to be as good at basketball. And no matter how much time you stand in front of the hoop and shoot, you need to have game experience and reacting to other people on the court. And so if that's not possible, having some way of having yourself stand in for other people, it's so helpful.
Well, I wondered if we could just steer the conversation a little bit back towards kind of the programming and really thinking about how this project came to be. Obviously, this past summer's events, and even so, as a musician myself and someone who is also an artistic director in charge of an ensemble, there's so much that to think about these days, both with the technology and the pandemic, but and then the kind of the racial reckoning. So in regards to, more inclusivity in programming and things like that, in addition to programming works like what Kenji Fear No Music season this year is about, like what other things do you think that we as artists can do to kind of forward that change that we all want, that we all say that we want in our world, as far as just more inclusion of various voices.
I came up with this idea because obviously of what was going on in the spring, but it wasn't just what was going on. It was the way I would see other kind of like larger institutional arts organizations responding with these kind of platitudes about we believe Black Lives Matter, and but where's the follow through there? It's an easy thing to say that, but if you just a quick glance at the last few years of programming shows that apparently Black lives don't matter that much in terms of devoting your time on stage to playing this pretty large body of music out there by Black artists. And so I thought, well, what can we do? We're, like I said, we're small and nimble and not afraid of risk. I mean, our name's Fear No Music. We should be able to take some risks. And I thought, well, if we did exclusively music of Black composers, that would mean something. And then when we decided we had to be totally online, and it looked like solo performances would be the most elegant way to handle that. I thought, okay, a full season of solo music by Black composers, I can do this. And it wasn't that hard. That's kind of what was, it's almost embarrassing how not hard it was. and I would get recognition for my programming for this, and that's nice to hear that. But I feel weird because I should have thought of that sooner. I should have known of some of these composers sooner. That's my job. I'm in a position as an artistic director of any organization. I'm a gatekeeper, and it's my job to think about these issues, and I should have thought of it sooner. So I'm doing what I can, and there's backlash. There are people who, just like in areas outside of the arts, people talk about diversity hires and identity politics, and the point that gets lost there is we've had centuries of homogeneity hires, right? If you look a certain way, if you're a certain gender, you get hired. Your music gets played, and nobody had a problem with that for a really long time. And so to flip that script for one season out of 30 for our organization, and frankly, there are groups who've gone a century without playing as much music by Black composers as we've already played this year. It would take a while before we corrected it enough for it to truly be equitable. So as far as I'm concerned, we're going to continue kind of double down on this kind of programming and until we have a true sense of equity. And then the other part of it is, it's great to hear that one piece by Florence Price. And she's a wonderful composer, very accomplished, and that's great, but there's stuff beyond that. And as James was saying earlier, it's on us to do the work to find those other voices. One thing about this concert in particular I was happy about, and something I was really trying to do, was to have a multi-generational lineup. Ed Bland passed away about 5 or 6 years ago. Nicole Mitchell's probably about my age, middle-aged, and Derek Carter's young, he's in his 20s. And I wanted to have that as another component of the diversity.
Great. Yeah.
Should I jump in, or I could? Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think how to approach this. I mean, in some ways, Kenji, I really appreciate the model of making a commitment. I think, I think some people view like making a commitment to, we're just going to do X as like, it's tainted by like some sort of idea of like quotas that, harkens back to like affirmative action or something that, like, for better or worse, people have associations with. But the way I view these things is, Kenji has put forward what some people would say is a bold goal here. I mean, as he mentioned, it wasn't that hard to achieve, which is, I think, testament to like how much music is being overlooked. But I tell people when I'm having conversations with them about improving diversity, just set a really low bar for yourself. And if you think that's like so low to be like meaningless, like look at your repertoire and see how often you fail to achieve like these really relatively low bars. And I think if the institution as a whole had a few more organizations, a lot more organizations, honestly, kind of committing to these bold goals here and there in a season, very quickly, sort of our subconscious sense of what repertoire is out there and what repertoire is worth doing would start to change. And I think, 10, 20 years from now, you might not necessarily need to do so much, like we're holding ourselves to achieving at least X, Y, Z, whatever. And hopefully those goals are shifting. But I've been in too many conversations where and I'm including myself in this, organizations where, I'm a gatekeeper, as Kenji said. I've had too many conversations where it just goes around and around and not enough changes, when in reality, like as we've talked about with searching for repertoire, it's painfully easy to find stuff that you want to play. If you end up with a season that has no women in it, or no Latinx composers or whatever, I guarantee you, if you just force yourself to look for something, you will find something within 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes that you want to play because of its quality as music and not because it checks some box. So, I mean, it's a little bit complicated, but, if just forcing yourself to search for things yields those results where you do feel committed to a piece on its merits and you want to play it. I mean, that's to some degree a testament to the problem that we have. And it's not just in contemporary music. I've recently been playing a clarinet quintet by Samuel Coleridge Taylor a lot. And, for clarinet players, the clarinet quintet is there. We have a lot of these great storied clarinet quintets by surprise white European composers that are performed all the time. And, I'm embarrassed that I didn't know this piece until a couple years ago, because in my mind, it is just as good as the Mozart clarinet quintet, the Brahms clarinet quintet, which are great pieces, keep playing them, whatever, but they tend to be done to death. And like, this is a piece that should be part of the standard repertoire in every college student clarinetist should know about this piece, and that's not true at this point. But yeah, I mean, as Kenji sort of alluded to, and we've talked about, repertoire is just one area. I think it's important to be committed to, particularly be committed to creating a more equitable world in terms of commissioning who's getting commissioned, so that in particular, like building the tracks forward in our industry, that the opportunity afforded to create new work, which people have faced all sorts of barriers going back hundreds of years, who tends to get those resources. That's something I think we can really do a lot to change. I think it's really important. But there's, I mean, I was just working on our diversity statement for a chamber music organization I still work with in Albuquerque, and when you go through all the facets of your organization that need improvement, and really commit yourself to writing them down and think about it, there's a lot of areas that need to be worked on beyond just repertoire and commissioning, which are two I've been thinking about lately. But obviously there are many aspects that need work.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Also, I mean, we've been talking about access, what technology has kind of given increased access for so many of us, but also just access to music education. I mean, as an educator, that's something that I think about a lot. And specifically kind of, the classical music kind of world, it's just much less accessible and for lots of different communities. So I don't know, Brian, do you have any thoughts on this as well? Like in terms of from your, your line of work or your perspective?
Nothing directly, because, I'm not a artistic director. It's more about, the opportunities of project. I guess for me, it's more about choosing the projects I work on. And, I guess there's a reason, in my world, I can kind of sell pharmaceuticals or, for money, or I can, invest my time in projects that I believe in, of which, this certainly qualifies. And so, there's a degree that works for anyone. You can be a studio musician in Hollywood and, play, film scores and have a nice, union paycheck for the rest of your life. But, I think there's a kind of a circle of people that are out to kind of make a statement. And so that's, once you get into that world, you get connected to more people doing the same thing. And if you want to, you can spend a lifetime doing those kinds of things. So even if I'm not, choosing the programming, I can certainly choose who I'm working for and what kind of programming and organizations I'm supporting.
I would say, Brian, I wonder what you think about this. In music production, music technology, that's a pretty interesting field where some of the traditional skills, like music theory, like knowledge of common practice period music theory and even notation, isn't necessarily relevant. And there are some incredibly sophisticated musical people working in music production for whom like a Pro Tools file or just looking at waveforms, that's basically a graphic notation of music, just as we would read our traditional notation. And so I think recognizing that as legitimate as this particular kind of training that we get in the classical tradition, that is kind of an interesting thing to do right now.
Yeah. I have a friend who's very much into experimental and electronic music, and he'll just like set up a YouTube stream of a tape machine on a loop that the tape is like running out and will eventually break, and so it kind of borders on installation art kinds of things. But you also remind me of a music teacher of mine when I was in school, of the definition of what is music, and his his definition was humanly organized sound, right? So it doesn't have to be exactly what you're saying. It doesn't have to be notated. It doesn't have to be played on an instrument. You know, it's simply any kind of sound experience that was created by people, supposedly for people, I guess. But that sort of like creates this really broad, wide definition.
I think it was Osvaldo Golohoff who said that the most important folk instrument in the last 50 years has been the laptop. And I think there's some real truth to that.
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead. Okay, I was just gonna say, yes, when I was going through school, the big hot new thing was Max MSP, which is now sort of a standard, well-known endeavor. And I don't know if we should dive into that can of worms about, when it's useful and when it's not. But certainly the sort of the world of electronic music and certainly what's possible now it only continues to get bigger and bigger. So it is an exciting time to be, especially in contemporary music, that you can explore all of these new ideas and new sounds and possibilities. Definitely.
Well, there's one more question that we have, and this is, I guess, kind of in light of what we're facing with the pandemic. There's so much, stress and burnout, and so I'm curious. I guess we can start with James. Like, as a performing artist, how have you dealt with kind of motivation? Have you found that have you imposed that on yourself, or have you found an external way to kind of deal with that in light of, all the things going on in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a couple of things. One of them is, I compose on the side, kind of on and off. I've done that for 20 plus years, and lately, with things getting as busy as they were pre-pandemic, I wasn't writing as much. And so one of the first things I decided was that if I can't compose something right now, when like my entire calendar has been like decimated, like when am I going to do it? So I forced myself to write a piece, and I've written a couple things, and done some exercises for myself to record like kind of multi-track clarinet things. I've produced like a ton of videos online. Like almost every day I go like record some random piece by Bach. I love Bach, and I'm like almost embarrassed. I've like probably like made like 60 videos of like just like random Bach pieces on clarinet, and I post them online, and like it's totally just like, I don't think anyone cares about them. I don't care if anyone sees them. It's just, for me, it's been a thing to, I'm not saying that to be weird, I really mean it. It's just like, this is a thing for me to like pretend that I go to work, and like I'm not embarrassed about it. It's just like, I like this music. Like the clarinet didn't exist in Bach's time. It's like, it all sounds good on any instrument, and like as far as counterpoint and all that kind of stuff, it's really fun to dive into it. And so like, and honestly, it's totally like just like a therapy thing to like just like give myself a little bit of distraction, make sure that I'm not like doom scrolling on like Twitter all day, which like I have, my wife can attest to that happening occasionally. It's just something I can do to kind of anchor me and just get me to focus and like, feel connected with my craft. And like Kenji said with his basketball metaphor, it's like, it's been a solid way to just kind of like practice my skills, and posting it online forces me to feel accountable to like some product. As like silly as that is, it's like a little like fake performance that I do every day to like, I have to like ship this product, like, and it takes me like an hour or two, and I honestly have to, I'm almost like embarrassed. Like it totally impacts my mood like a lot, to just have those little projects, and just know that like, if I don't feel like I have enough in any given week to kind of keep me grounded, and I might be a little disorganized, I'm just gonna make a couple of these videos. I started doing like Chopin piano nocturnes and stuff like that too. And it's been a fun project, and like I was saying, we were talking to Brian earlier, I've started kind of helped me get a little better at recording at home and experimenting with mic placement and different mics and levels and like reverb and all that kind of stuff, which I think is useful to get a little bit of that going at this point.
Well, we just have, about 3 minutes left. So, well, obviously, I want to thank each of you again so much for taking the time out of your day after the premiere to kind of spend with us. And kind of to close, I wondered, since most of the people that are watching are students, is there anything that you would say to yourself, if you could, when you were their age? So, undergraduate years, something that you wish someone had said to you, or that you wish you knew. I don't know.
Yeah, well, Anna, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I wish that we could be in the room with all of you and see the students and meet them in person. And yeah, looking back to who I was, 30 years ago, when I went off to college, I think I would just tell my young self to just, for goodness sake, just chill out. It's gonna be okay, and it won't look like what you're expecting, but it'll work, and to just relax. And one thing that has helped me is we can drive ourselves crazy wondering what we're supposed to be doing and who we're supposed to be meeting and connecting with and networking, and what opportunities should we be at. And what I finally decided was I'm just going to just decide that I'm in the right place at the right time, wherever I am, and with whomever I'm talking to at that moment, and just sort of to be present in that, and not worry so much. That's all I got.
I mean, that's great advice. I was literally going to say the same thing about chilling out. I think it's, and I've definitely, looking back, wasted a lot of years trying to ask that question of like, where exactly should I be? Should I, do I want to be here? Do I want to be there? Is this the right job for me? All that kind of stuff. And most of it was a complete waste. On a more pragmatic side, I would maybe say, I think to some degree it's important to work hard. You have to do some of that at some point. I think I would have told my younger self to try and be a little more efficient with like your practice time. Just practice maybe like 70% as much as you did, and just be like twice as efficient if possible. And I would say listen to your teachers a little bit more than I did. I think that everybody does have like a unique personality that needs to be fostered, but there are like some basic technical things and just like basic knowledge sets that are incredibly helpful. So just like at least try, whatever technical thing your teacher, encourages you to do. I'm literally fixing things right now, not fixing, but I'm finally implementing things that my high school clarinet teachers told me would probably be a good idea. And they're totally right. And, again, it's a fine balance between like doing it your own way, which is very valuable, but also like collecting as much information you can and truly trying to build on some of the knowledge that came before you abandon it selectively and strategically.
I don't know if I have too much to say. I definitely didn't have to tell myself to relax, because I was the one walking around in Birkenstocks with a Frisbee. So, but I did come back to school to mix a musical many years later, and many of the students at that time, who were I guess about 5 years younger than I was at that time, saying that oh man, you know, somehow the students then, it was a different environment than when I was there, and they had become very competitive. Whereas when I was there, we were all just kind of like a group of friends hanging out. And so there was like, oh, you know, you taught us how to like just relax. So, you know, I don't know if you, you guys maybe needed someone to just come by with a Frisbee and tell you to hang out. If I had any advice, I would just say, don't stop learning, you know, always be open to new ideas and new techniques or anything you can learn, if you decide to pursue contemporary music, you know, there may be a time that you're, you know, running a laptop from the stage for your own performance because, you know, you don't have the money to pay for someone else to do it for you. So, you know, the rate that technology and things are coming, you can never, you know, keep up with everything. So I would just say as much as you can learn and know about is only going to help you going forward. So I'll put a plug in for my mom said that Oprah said that there's no such thing as the right place at the right time. You were prepared when the opportunity presented itself. So the best you can do is be prepared when that opportunity comes.
Well said. Yeah, wonderful words of wisdom from each of you. On behalf of the music department at Linfield University, thank you all again. And James, thank you so much for the gift of your music, your performance and your musicality. You have really inspired us all tonight. So, and yes, I can't wait for when all of our paths may cross in person once this whole thing is over and behind us.
Likewise.
Thank you. And thank you all students and community members and faculty, staff for joining in tonight. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. And please don't forget that the second event of the residency will be taking place on March 1st, where we will have the opportunity to listen to Amelia Lucas on the flute. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.